What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken environmental advocates walks into a studio expecting a respectful conversation, only to find himself facing a host whose only goal seems to be tearing him down? The result is nothing short of absolute chaos, and what you're about to witness might just be the most explosive television moment of the entire year. Before we dive headfirst into this wild encounter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really went wrong here. The atmosphere inside the studio was buzzing even before the cameras started rolling. Audience members whispered excitedly among themselves. After all, it wasn't every day that Leonardo DiCaprio, Oscar-winning actor, international icon, and one of the most passionate environmental activists on the planet, made an appearance on The View. The stage lights blazed down with relentless heat, casting dramatic shadows and giving everything a heightened sense of tension. DiCaprio, calm and collected as always, settled into the plush guest chair across from the panel, unaware of the verbal crossfire awaiting him. He had come onto the show with a clear purpose: to discuss his latest environmental documentary, a project he had poured his heart, time, and resources into. The film was meant to raise awareness about climate change, endangered ecosystems, and the urgent need for action. DiCaprio expected the usual routine: questions about global warming, deforestation, melting ice caps, renewable energy, and the future of the planet. He anticipated thoughtful conversation, maybe even a bit of pushback, but nothing he couldn't handle. What he did not anticipate was a full-on ambush. Joy Behar sat across from him, her posture stiff with anticipation. She had her notes laid out in front of her like carefully arranged ammunition, each sheet a potential weapon. Her signature smirk stretched across her face as she leaned in, ready to strike. The audience sensed something was off. The air felt charged, almost electric. "So, Leo," she began, dragging out his name with a tone dripping in sarcasm. The way she said it made several audience members shift uncomfortably. "You're here talking about climate change again." She arched an eyebrow as if the very concept annoyed her. "Tell me, how many private jets did you take to get here today?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Some gasped, others exchanged glances. This wasn't a question. It was an accusation. DiCaprio's expression tightened for a split second. His eyebrows drew together, a subtle sign of surprise, but he kept his composure. As someone who had been in the public eye for decades, he was used to criticism, used to skepticism, used to the occasional hostile interview. But even he hadn't expected the conversation to open with a direct attack. "Actually, Joy," he said steadily, keeping his tone calm and professional, "I drove here from my hotel. I've been very conscious about reducing my carbon footprint, which is exactly why I'm here today to discuss the importance of making environmentally responsible choices." But Joy didn't give him a chance to finish. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, please," she interrupted, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Spare me the rehearsed speeches. You celebrities say one thing and do another. People at home deserve honesty." The tension in the room skyrocketed. The other hosts looked uneasy, some shifting in their seats, others glancing at each other nervously. No one dared to intervene yet, but the discomfort was palpable. The production assistants off camera exchanged frantic looks, probably wondering whether they should signal for a commercial break. DiCaprio took a breath, clearly choosing patience over confrontation. "I'm not here to deliver a rehearsed speech," he replied. "I'm here because the planet is in danger. We're seeing record-breaking temperatures, disappearing wildlife, and extreme weather events across the world. My goal is to raise awareness and encourage real action." Joy tilted her head, tapping her pen against the desk. "And yet," she said pointedly, "you own several homes, you travel constantly, you live a lifestyle most Americans could never dream of. So tell us, Leonardo, why should anyone listen to you?" The studio audience gasped again. Some even booed softly, unsure whether they were reacting to Joy's accusation or the uncomfortable spectacle unfolding in front of them. But Joy pressed on, her tone growing harsher with each word. "You say you care about the environment, but your lifestyle doesn't exactly scream eco-friendly. Isn't that a little hypocritical?" For a moment, DiCaprio's calm facade cracked ever so slightly. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, not aggressively, but with a newfound firmness. Joy, advocating for the environment, doesn't mean living a perfect life. It means striving to do better, encouraging others to do better, and using whatever influence you have to shine a light on the problem. I've been investing in renewable energy, funding conservation efforts, and supporting scientific research for years. Does that not count for anything? His voice carried a quiet intensity, measured but unshakable. Joy opened her mouth to interject again, but this time he didn't give her the chance. And for the record, he continued, I don't need to be perfect to care about the planet. None of us do. What matters is that we start making changes before it's too late. The audience erupted into applause, loud and passionate. Even some members of the panel looked relieved, as if DiCaprio had finally regained control of the situation. But Joy wasn't finished. With a scoff, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You talk about people making changes, but let's be honest. Most of your fans can't afford solar panels or electric cars. So what exactly are you asking them to do? DiCaprio responded without hesitation. I'm asking them to stay informed, to vote for leaders who care about environmental policies, to support sustainable companies when they can, to reduce waste, conserve energy, and understand that small steps matter. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. This time, even Joy was silent. The intensity of his answer caught her off guard. A long moment passed before the studio cut to commercial break, leaving the audience buzzing with shock, admiration, and disbelief. And that was just the beginning. You lecture the rest of us about our carbon emissions while you yacht around the Mediterranean with supermodels. Don't you think that's just a tiny bit hypocritical? Joy Behar fired off the words like bullets, each one sharper than the last. Her tone was dripping with accusation, and the studio could practically feel the temperature rise. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, a provocation, a public call out designed to corner one of Hollywood's biggest stars live on air. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their expressions betrayed everything they were trying to hide: discomfort, disbelief, and a shared sense that the conversation had taken a sharp turn into dangerous territory. Whoopi Goldberg's eyes widened slightly as she glanced back and forth between Joy and DiCaprio, silently begging for someone, anyone, to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. But it was too late. The atmosphere in the studio thickened like fog. The once cheerful audience fell silent, the kind of silence that grips a room when everyone senses a confrontation about to explode. You could practically hear the tension crackling in the air, the electricity of conflict humming through the space like a live wire. Leonardo DiCaprio straightened in his chair, a subtle shift, but one that said everything. He wasn't intimidated. He was preparing himself. His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened, and there was a new edge in his voice when he finally spoke. Joy. He began steadily. I think you're conflating personal choices with systemic advocacy. Yes, I've made mistakes in the past. I've acknowledged them publicly, but I've also donated over $100 million to environmental causes. He leaned forward slightly, emphasizing each word. I've changed my entire lifestyle. I've spent years working with scientists, conservationists, and climate experts to raise awareness and push for real solutions. Before he could continue, Joy cut him off with a harsh, mocking scoff that echoed across the studio. Oh, please, she said loudly. $100 million. That's pocket change for someone worth over $300 million. Several audience members gasped. Others muttered in disbelief. The tension had officially crossed into hostility. Joy wasn't done. What percentage of your wealth is that, really? She demanded, waving her hand mockingly. And don't even get me started on that foundation of yours. You talk a big game, Leo, but how much of that money actually goes to the environment versus administrative costs? Salaries, travel, public relations. She narrowed her eyes as if she had cornered him with irrefutable evidence. I think viewers deserve to know. A low hum spread through the audience. Shock, discomfort, anticipation. This wasn't the kind of conversation they expected when they bought their tickets. They came for entertainment, not a public interrogation. Even the camera operators exchanged worried glances, uncertain whether they should zoom in for the drama or cut away to avoid capturing a full-blown meltdown. DiCaprio inhaled slowly, gathering himself. The frustration flickered in his eyes, but he refused to lash out. His voice remained controlled, almost painfully composed, as he answered, "Joy, I'm sorry, but your accusations are misleading," he said, choosing his words carefully. "My foundation's financials are publicly available. Anyone can look them up. More than 80% of our funds go directly to conservation projects and climate initiatives, not PR, not luxury staff retreats, actual on-the-ground work, habitat restoration, indigenous community partnerships, clean energy investments, scientific research." Joy leaned back in her chair, unimpressed. "That's what you claim," she retorted. "But we've heard that before from plenty of celebrities. Trust me, the money goes to the right place. Meanwhile, people are struggling to pay their bills, and they're getting lectures from millionaires who fly private and live in mansions." This time, Whoopi visibly winced. The audience didn't just feel the tension, they absorbed it. The atmosphere had turned into a courtroom, and DiCaprio was on trial, facing a prosecutor who wasn't interested in answers, only in winning the argument. He took another breath, then spoke again, more firmly this time. "I'm not here to lecture anyone," he said. "I'm here to share information and encourage people to make whatever changes they can. This isn't about guilt or blame. It's about cooperation, about survival. We don't have time for infighting. Climate change affects all of us." His voice resonated with sincerity, but Joy wasn't having it. "Oh, save it," she said sharply. "You celebrities sit in your eco-friendly glass houses and throw stones at everyone else. You tell people to stop driving gas cars while you fly around the world filming movies." "Joy," Whoopi finally whispered, trying, desperately, to pull the brakes. But Joy ignored her. The audience watched with bated breath. Some were sympathetic to DiCaprio, others skeptical, but everyone could see the emotional weight on his face. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending his life's work. He leaned in once more, his voice low but resolute. "I've committed my entire career and fortune to fighting this crisis," he said. "I've testified before lawmakers. I've funded conservation programs globally. I've worked with climate scientists for decades. My foundation has protected endangered species, funded coral reef restoration, and helped communities adapt to rising sea levels. And yet," Joy snapped, "here you are lecturing regular people while living a lifestyle none of them could ever dream of." The last word hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. A hush fell across the studio. DiCaprio didn't respond immediately. For the first time, he looked genuinely exhausted, not from the questions, but from the constant battle of having his motives undermined and his efforts dismissed. Finally, he exhaled and said quietly, "I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." The audience erupted, not in cheers, but in a conflicted mixture of applause, murmurs, and stunned disbelief, and the segment wasn't even over yet. "Are you questioning the legitimacy of my foundation?" DiCaprio asked, his voice dropping lower, calm, but with an unmistakable tremor beneath the surface. It was the first real sign that his famously unshakable composure was beginning to crack. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, and his eyes narrowed with quiet intensity. "Because if you are," he continued, leaning forward, "I can provide you with detailed financial reports that show exactly where every dollar goes." Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with an expression of smug satisfaction. She looked like someone who had drawn blood and was eager for more. She wasn't just interviewing him, she was dissecting him. "Oh, I'm sure you can provide reports," she said with a sarcastic chuckle. "Hollywood accounting is famous for making numbers say whatever you want them to say." She shrugged dramatically. "Just like how you've managed to make yourself look like an environmental hero while burning fossil fuels faster than some small countries." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Murmurs filled the room, soft gasps, whispered exchanges, uneasy shifting in seats. Joy's attacks were no longer tough questions. They had crossed firmly into personal, almost hostile territory. Sunny Hostin tried to interject, her voice lifting nervously. "Actually, Leo, could you tell us more about the documentary?" But Joy wasn't done. She waved Sunny off with a flick of her hand, her eyes locked on DiCaprio like a predator who had found a weakness. "You know what really bothers me about celebrities like you?" Joy pressed on, her voice rising and her pen pointed directly at him like a weapon. You think that because you played someone important in a movie, that somehow makes you an expert in real life. You dropped out of high school, Leo. You didn't even finish. So tell me, what exactly qualifies you to lecture world leaders about climate policy? What makes you any more knowledgeable than the people sitting at home watching this? The question hit the studio like a slap. The audience's gasp was loud this time, sharp, collective, and impossible to ignore. Even the other hosts looked stunned. You could practically hear the producers backstage wondering whether they should cut to commercial immediately. DiCaprio's jaw locked visibly. His hands, which until now rested calmly on the armrests, tightened their grip, knuckles turning a shade lighter. He didn't explode, but the restraint it took was obvious. Education comes in many forms, Joy, he said carefully, though tension strained every syllable. I've spent the last 15 years working directly with scientists, researchers, and policy experts. I've traveled to melting glaciers, walked through deforested regions, and met communities suffering from climate change firsthand. I've gathered knowledge from the people living the crisis, not just reading about it. Then he looked her dead in the eyes. Have you? Joy scoffed loudly. I don't need to visit glaciers to know when someone's being a hypocrite. She snapped back. And I certainly don't need to be lectured by someone who thinks private jet travel magically becomes acceptable as long as you buy carbon offsets afterward. She leaned in, eyes blazing with righteous indignation. That's like saying it's okay to punch someone as long as you apologize later. Another wave of shocked murmurs filled the studio. A few audience members even shook their heads, unsure whether Joy had crossed a line or simply spoken an uncomfortable truth. But no one could deny the tension, thick, charged, and escalating with every exchange. That's a completely false equivalency. DiCaprio responded, his voice rising slightly for the first time. The calm was still there, but it was layered over barely controlled frustration. Carbon offsets, when done properly, do make a measurable difference. They fund reforestation projects, renewable energy development, and conservation programs. They help mitigate emissions. Joy cut him off again, almost shouting. That's not the point, but DiCaprio pushed through this time, unwilling to be silenced again. Yes, it is the point, he insisted. The world needs solutions, real solutions, not cynicism or cheap shots. We can't fix the climate crisis with perfectionism. We fix it by doing what we can, making better choices, pushing for systemic change, and supporting initiatives that reduce global emissions. He paused long enough for the weight of his words to settle. It's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about taking responsibility when you have the means to make a difference. Joy rolled her eyes dramatically, but for the first time, she didn't interrupt. The audience was hanging on every word. DiCaprio continued, his voice steadier now, regaining ground after the barrage of attacks. I'm not claiming to be flawless, he said. In fact, I've admitted my mistakes repeatedly, but I've also devoted my life, my resources, and my platform to supporting environmental work, because the crisis is bigger than all of us. This isn't about me, he added, gesturing toward the cameras. It's about the planet we're destroying, the species we're losing, the disasters we're already seeing in real time. Joy tapped her pen against the desk, her expression tightening, but she remained silent for once. This isn't about personal attacks, DiCaprio continued, and it certainly shouldn't be about tearing down anyone who's trying to help. We need unity, not division. We need urgency, not denial disguised as skepticism. For a moment, the studio was completely still. The audience watched, breath suspended, as two opposing forces clashed, one fighting with conviction, the other with provocation. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice soft, cautious, like someone carefully disarming a bomb. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, she said. Everyone, stay with us. And with that, the screen faded to commercial, leaving millions of viewers stunned, breathless, and desperate to see what would happen next. The way DiCaprio completely lost his composure when confronted with Joy's relentless, unfiltered questioning revealed something deeper, something people rarely get to see from celebrity activists. For years, Leonardo DiCaprio has been known as Hollywood's poster child for environmental awareness, a man praised globally for his documentaries, his speeches at the United Nations, and his public stance on climate change. But in that moment, under the scorching hot studio lights and Joy Behar's unyielding interrogation, the polished image cracked, even just slightly, and that glimpse behind the curtain was enough to send shockwaves through the audience watching both in the studio and at home. It wasn't that DiCaprio didn't know the facts, he did. It wasn't that he couldn't defend his foundation or explain his environmental efforts, he could, and he tried. But Joy's questioning wasn't the usual polite, controlled back and forth that celebrities are accustomed to during promotional interviews. Her tone wasn't warm, curious, or even neutral. It was confrontational, pointed, and brutally direct. She wasn't asking questions, she was firing accusations. And DiCaprio, despite his experience, despite his composure, despite his diplomatic training from decades of interviews, began to falter. You could see it in the small things. The way he leaned forward just a little too sharply, the slight tremor in his voice when he tried to push back, the tightness around his jaw each time Joy dismissed his efforts. Viewers weren't watching a calm discussion about climate science anymore. They were watching a man who had spent years being admired, suddenly being forced to defend himself like he was on trial. And that's what made the moment so explosive. This wasn't a scripted scene, it wasn't a carefully edited documentary, it wasn't a pre-recorded speech with every word reviewed by a media team. This was raw, live, immediate. Every slip, every expression, every hesitation was visible in real time. And Joy Behar made sure to capitalize on it. She pressed and pressed with the persistence of someone who wasn't interviewing a guest. She was examining a witness. And DiCaprio, who was clearly expecting a conversation about his documentary and environmental activism, wasn't prepared for the emotional ambush. The audience in the studio could feel it. They weren't clapping, laughing, or reacting the way audiences usually do. Instead, they sat frozen, leaning forward in their seats, watching Leonardo DiCaprio unravel, little by little under the pressure. Some looked shocked, others uncomfortable. A few even looked guilty, as if they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Online, people immediately started debating what the moment meant. Some argued that DiCaprio simply wasn't ready for genuine scrutiny, that he liked talking about climate change as long as the conversations were friendly and flattering. Others claimed Joy went too far, that her line of questioning crossed into personal attacks and was meant to humiliate rather than inform. And some viewers believed the whole situation exposed a bigger problem, the fragile line between celebrity activism and public accountability. For years, celebrities have taken on roles as advocate, talking about poverty, climate change, inequality, and global crises from their Beverly Hills mansions and private islands. They host charity events, create foundations, and give speeches that get millions of views online. And sure, many of them are genuinely passionate. They do donate money, they do raise awareness, they do inspire action. But the moment someone challenges them, the moment someone pokes a hole in their carefully constructed persona, the reaction often reveals more than any speech ever could. And DiCaprio's reaction that day revealed a lot. It showed that even the most polished advocates struggle when questioned aggressively. It showed that celebrity activism, for all its positives, comes with contradictions that can't simply be brushed aside by big donations or passionate documentaries. And it showed that the public is no longer satisfied with celebrities preaching virtue without being held responsible for their own actions. Joy Behar didn't hold back, and whether you loved her approach or hated it, she forced DiCaprio into a corner where he couldn't rely on charm or reputation. He had to defend himself, his lifestyle, his choices, his credibility, and when he finally lost some of his composure, even for a moment, millions of viewers saw something rare, a celebrity struggling under the weight of his own image. And that's why this moment became one of the most talked about television confrontations of the year. So if you want more stories like this, raw moments, explosive interviews, and behind the scenes controversies that reveal the truth behind Hollywood's glossy surface, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and brings you more content just like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think Joy went too far? Was she exposing hypocrisy or attacking someone who didn't deserve it? Let me know what you think. Joy's voice sliced through the studio like a thin, cold knife, Dripping with that trademark blend of sarcasm and superiority she wielded like a weapon. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, as if she had just caught a child throwing a tantrum. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle being challenged." Leonardo DiCaprio stopped mid-stride, the light from the overhead rigs casting long shadows across the stage as he slowly turned back toward her. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. For a brief moment, the entire studio seemed to inhale and hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. "Challenged," he repeated, the word rolling out of him with a sudden force. The studio walls practically vibrated as his voice boomed across the space, echoing with frustration, disbelief, and a simmering anger he had clearly been holding back for far too long. Crew members froze where they stood. A camera operator's hands faltered for just a second. Even the live audience quieted, the murmurs dying instantly, replaced by an electric tension thick enough to taste. "You call this a challenge?" DiCaprio continued, his voice rising, each word hitting with the controlled precision of a man who had been pushed past his limit, but was still clinging to professionalism. "You haven't presented a single fact, not one, no counterargument, no alternative solution, nothing rooted in research, policy, science, or even basic conversation." He took a step forward, eyes locked on Joy like he was finally seeing her without the filters of politeness or celebrity diplomacy. "All you've done," he said, pointing sharply toward her desk, "is try to tear me down personally, because you disagree with environmental policy, not because you actually know anything about it, not because you've read anything beyond a headline, but because attacking me makes for good TV." Joy didn't flinch, she didn't blink. Instead, she tilted her head, lips curling into a mocking half-smile, the kind she saved for moments when she believed she had the upper hand, even if she didn't. "Sit down, Leonardo," she commanded, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're embarrassing yourself on national television." A few audience members gasped quietly. One woman actually covered her mouth. It wasn't every day someone talked to Leonardo DiCaprio like that, especially not live, and definitely not with millions of viewers watching. But DiCaprio didn't sit. He didn't even move. Instead, he laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed more like disbelief than amusement. "I'm embarrassing myself," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Really." He remained standing, shoulders squared, posture tall and firm, as though sitting down would mean surrendering a point he wasn't willing to lose. "Not today, not on this topic. You're the one." DiCaprio continued, his voice now lower but somehow even more powerful. "Who has turned what should have been a serious, thoughtful discussion about the future of our planet into a tabloid hit piece." He gestured toward the cameras, toward the audience, toward the entire chaotic scene that had erupted. "This was supposed to be about climate change, about the environment, about real issues that affect real people. But instead, you've turned it into a spectacle, a cheap ratings grab dressed up as journalism." Joy's smile faltered, only for half a second, but enough for the audience to notice. DiCaprio saw it too, and the slightest shift in his expression suggested he recognized that he had finally hit a nerve. "You invited me here," he said, under the pretense of having an honest, responsible conversation about environmental policy. "You said this show wanted to help raise awareness, that you cared about the facts, that your platform could be used to educate people. And instead, you blindsided me with personal insults, misleading questions, and talking points that sound like they were pulled straight from an angry internet comment section." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Even the producers, usually fearless in the face of on-air chaos, were exchanging uneasy looks behind the cameras. DiCaprio continued, voice steady, but full of controlled fire. "I don't mind debate. I welcome criticism. I'm not above being questioned. I expect to be held accountable for my views, but what you did wasn't debate, it wasn't questioning, it wasn't journalism, it was provocation for entertainment's sake." He took a slow breath, trying to rein himself in, though the frustration was still thick in the air. "If you disagree with my perspective, fine. If you think my approach is wrong, let's talk about it. If you believe there's a better solution, explain it. But don't pretend you're challenging me when all you're doing is trying to score points at my expense." Joy opened her mouth as if to respond, but DiCaprio held up a hand, not aggressively, but with enough authority to silence her. "This planet," he said, is not some punchline, not a segment, not a prop for your show. People are suffering. Communities are drowning, burning, starving, displaced. Scientists are begging us to listen. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. And you think it's appropriate to mock, interrupt, twist words, and turn this into a circus. The room was silent now, completely silent. The kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. DiCaprio shook his head again, this time with a deep sadness that softened the edges of his anger. You want to make me look foolish? Go ahead. You want to attack my character? Fine. You've done it before, you'll do it again. But don't pretend any of this helps the actual conversation. Don't act like this is contributing to anything except more noise. He finally lowered himself back into his chair, not out of defeat but out of exhaustion. An exhaustion that came from years of fighting, advocating, and trying to make people care. Joy stared at him, her scripted confidence cracked. The audience waited breathless, and the entire studio knew this was no longer just an interview. It was a moment that none of them were going to forget anytime soon.